Ladies and gentlemen, we are all wanderers in this vast, ever-changing world. Each of us walks a unique path, and with every step, our consciousness shapes the reality we experience. But it's crucial to understand that the reality I live in is not the same as yours, and your reality is not mine. When we speak, we often share opinions, not truths. But opinions are not the same as reality. They are merely reflections of our inner worlds, distorted through the lens of our personal experiences, fears, desires, and unconscious patterns. The first thing we must acknowledge is the uniqueness of individual consciousness. Our minds are shaped by a lifetime of experiences, both conscious and unconscious. These experiences create a map of reality that is entirely personal, unique to us. It is influenced by our past traumas, our joys, and the very stories we tell ourselves. Two individuals can witness the same event, yet they will carry away completely different interpretations, because their inner worlds are different. You see, reality is not a singular objective truth. It is a personal, subjective experience. The world as I see it is not the world you see, and your view of the world is not necessarily mine. But how often do we forget this? How often do we assume that others should see the world the same way we do? It is a mistake that arises from a tendency to project our unconscious minds onto others. When we speak, we don't just communicate words. We project the images and symbols that live within us, often without realizing it. Our opinions, our judgments are reflections of our inner archetypes, deep patterns that form the core of our being. But these projections are not universal truths. They are fragments of our inner selves. And when we impose them on others, we risk misunderstanding the richness and depth of their lived experiences. So I ask you, what would happen if we stopped projecting our reality onto others? What if, instead of assuming that our way of seeing the world is the only way, we allow space for others to express their own truth? What if we recognize that the person before us is not a mirror of ourselves, but a distinct being with their own complex internal world? Understanding that their reality is not our own creates space for empathy, for dialogue, and for a deeper connection that transcends mere opinion. Finally, we must integrate the shadow, those parts of ourselves that we refuse to see. The shadow is the unconscious collection of thoughts, desires, and traits that we suppress because they don't fit into our idealized version of who we think we are. Yet, it is through confronting the shadow that we gain true self-awareness. And it is through embracing the diversity of experiences and opinions that we become whole. When we reject or dismiss others' realities, we are often rejecting parts of ourselves. By integrating the shadow of our own consciousness, we come to understand that others are not separate from us. They are mirrors reflecting aspects of our own humanity. We may never fully comprehend the entirety of another's reality, but we can approach them with humility, recognizing that their experience is as valid as our own. Your opinion is not my reality, but the space between our realities can be the birthplace of true understanding. Let us not confuse our limited views with the infinite complexity of existence. Instead, let us walk together, not as mirrors of one another, but as fellow travelers on separate yet intertwined journeys. Thank you. This speech touches upon the core themes of individuality, projection, and the integration of the shadow, all inspired by Jungian thought, but without directly naming him. It emphasizes the importance of recognizing the uniqueness of others' experiences and being open to understanding them. He said, expand the key point no one with 1,200 words, but don't subheading. ChatGPT said, The uniqueness of individual consciousness is a concept that invites deep reflection on the nature of perception and reality. It speaks to the core of who we are as human beings, how we experience the world, how we interpret it, and ultimately how we create our own reality through the lens of our consciousness. To understand the depth of this uniqueness, we must first acknowledge that reality is not something objective and universal that exists independently of us. It is in fact something personal, something molded by the individual mind. This realization shifts our perspective from the belief in a singular objective reality to an understanding of multiple realities, all of which are shaped by the perceptions of those experiencing them. At the heart of human consciousness is the complex interplay between the conscious mind and the unconscious. Our conscious thoughts, those of which we are aware and can articulate, are only the surface of a much deeper and more mysterious realm that shapes who we are. The unconscious mind, which houses everything from forgotten memories to deeply ingrained archetypes, works behind the scenes, influencing our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors in ways we may not fully understand. The unconscious does not operate with the same logic or rationality as the conscious mind. It is more instinctual, more symbolic, and often more emotional. As a result, each individual's consciousness is a mixture of both conscious and unconscious elements, and the way these elements interact defines the unique reality that each of us lives in. This uniqueness is not limited to just our immediate perceptions of the world around us. It extends to how we make sense of the events we experience, how we form beliefs, and how we navigate the world. Our background, culture, upbringing, and even genetic predispositions all play a significant role in shaping the lens through which we see the world. Two people who grow up in radically different environments will naturally develop distinct ways of interpreting life. The child raised in a nurturing, supportive household may grow up with a sense of trust in the world, seeing opportunities and possibilities everywhere. On the other hand, a child who experiences hardship or trauma may develop a more guarded and skeptical view of life. Their worldview, their reality, is colored by their unique experiences, creating a vastly different perception of the same world. These two individuals may walk down the same street, but each will see it through an entirely different set of eyes, shaped by their respective experiences. Furthermore, the uniqueness of individual consciousness is also defined by the interplay of the different layers of our psyche. We each carry within us the inheritance of our ancestors, the collective experiences of generations past, as well as the rich tapestry of memories and desires that we have accumulated over our own lives. The personal and collective histories that reside within our unconscious minds shape how we see the world, how we interpret relationships, and how we navigate complex social and moral questions. The unconscious stores not only personal memories, but also universal symbols and archetypes that help us make sense of our lives and the world around us. These archetypes, which are shared across humanity, form the building blocks of how we relate to others and to the world. However, each individual's relationship with these archetypes is deeply personal, influenced by their own experiences and psyche. One of the most profound elements of individual consciousness is the way in which it is constantly in flux. It is never static. Our consciousness is shaped by the ongoing process of change, growth, and development. As we move through life, we accumulate new experiences, learn new things, and adapt to new environments. These changes influence how we perceive the world and reshape our reality. What we may have believed to be true at one point in our lives may shift dramatically as we encounter new information or undergo personal transformation. For instance, a person who once saw life as a series of challenges to be overcome may later in life come to view challenges as opportunities for growth and self-discovery. This transformation in consciousness reflects not only the expansion of knowledge, but also the deepening of self-awareness, the individual becomes more attuned to their own inner workings. And through this process of integration, their reality expands and evolves. Our understanding of the uniqueness of individual consciousness also requires us to recognize the limitations inherent in our perceptions. We are not always fully aware of the factors that influence our consciousness, especially those that lie hidden in the unconscious mind. Our biases, assumptions, and deeply rooted beliefs can color our perception of the world in ways that we may not even realize. These biases can distort our view of reality, creating blind spots that prevent us from fully understanding other perspectives. It is only through introspection and the willingness to confront the hidden aspects of our psyche that we begin to uncover these distortions and come closer to seeing the world as it truly is. Even then, our perceptions will always be limited by the unique lens through which we view the world. The concept of the uniqueness of individual consciousness also speaks to the richness of human experience. If every person's consciousness is shaped by their own personal experiences, then each individual has a reality that is rich, complex, and multifaceted. No two people experience the world in exactly the same way, even though they may share certain common experiences. This is what makes human beings so profoundly interesting and mysterious. Every individual holds within them a universe of thoughts, feelings, desires, fears, and dreams that have never existed in the exact same form before and will never exist in the exact same form again. Our consciousness is a constant dance between the known and the unknown, the personal and the universal, the conscious and the unconscious. This recognition of the uniqueness of individual consciousness also brings with it a deep sense of humility. When we begin to understand that our reality is not universal but personal and subjective, we come to realize that we cannot simply impose our view of the world onto others. Each person's reality is their own, shaped by a lifetime of experiences, memories, and unconscious influences. To understand another person, we must be willing to acknowledge the richness of their inner world and the complexity of their perspective. This does not mean that we must agree with them, but it does mean that we must approach them with an open mind and an open heart, recognizing that their reality, though different from ours, is just as valid and real to them as ours is to us. In conclusion, the uniqueness of individual consciousness is a powerful and transformative idea. It reminds us that reality is not a fixed objective truth, but a subjective personal experience shaped by our inner worlds. It challenges us to question the assumptions we hold about ourselves and others, and encourages us to embrace the complexity of the human experience. By recognizing the individuality of each person's consciousness, we open ourselves to greater empathy, understanding, and connection with the world around us. Ultimately, it is through this recognition of the unique and personal nature of reality that we can begin to break down the barriers that divide us and build a more compassionate and harmonious world. You said, expand the key point no two with 1200 words, but don't subheading. ChatGPT said, the concept of projection is one of the most profound and often misunderstood aspects of human psychology. It refers to the unconscious tendency to attribute our own feelings, desires, thoughts, or impulses onto others. In other words, we see in others what we are unwilling or unable to acknowledge within ourselves. This projection of our internal world onto the external world is not a conscious act, but rather an automatic process that happens beyond our awareness. At its core, projection is an attempt to externalize and distance ourselves from aspects of our own psyche that we find uncomfortable, unpalatable, or threatening. By projecting these aspects onto others, we attempt to avoid confronting parts of ourselves that we deem unacceptable or foreign. The nature of projection is rooted deeply in the relationship between the conscious and unconscious minds. The unconscious mind holds a vast reservoir of thoughts, feelings, memories, and desires that are not fully integrated into our conscious awareness. Some of these elements are too painful or conflicting for the conscious mind to process directly, so they are relegated to the unconscious. However, the unconscious is not dormant, it is active and constantly influencing our thoughts and actions. Because these repressed elements are not fully acknowledged, they must find expression in some way. One of the primary ways they do so is through projection. Rather than acknowledging and integrating these disowned aspects of ourselves, we project them onto others, seeing them in the external world rather than within ourselves. The impact of projection on our interactions with others is immense. When we project our unconscious content onto another person, we are not seeing them as they truly are. Instead, we are seeing a distorted reflection of our own inner world. This creates a barrier to authentic communication and understanding because we are no longer engaging with the other person's reality, but with our own projections. For example, a person who harbors deep feelings of anger may project this anger onto others, seeing them as hostile or aggressive even if they are not. This distorted perception influences how we relate to others, often leading to misunderstandings, conflict, and alienation. Projection can manifest in many forms, some more subtle than others. For instance, when we feel insecure about our own abilities, we may project those insecurities onto others by assuming that they are also incompetent or incapable. Similarly, if we are struggling with feelings of guilt or shame, we may project those emotions onto others by accusing them of wrongdoing or criticizing their behavior. In these instances, our projections are a defense mechanism, a way of deflecting attention from our own internal conflicts and placing the blame on others. In doing so, we avoid the painful task of self-reflection and instead place the responsibility for our feelings and actions on external sources. Projection can also manifest in more overt and harmful ways, particularly in the context of relationships. For example, in a romantic relationship, one partner may project their own feelings of insecurity or jealousy onto the other, accusing them of being untrustworthy or disloyal, even when there is no evidence to support such claims. Similarly, a parent who feels a sense of inadequacy may project this feeling onto their child, placing unrealistic expectations on them or criticizing their every move. In these situations, the individual projecting their feelings is not only distorting their perception of the other person, but also imposing their own unresolved emotions onto them, creating tension and discord in the relationship. The root of projection lies in the unconscious processes that govern much of our behavior. The unconscious mind is not merely a repository for repressed thoughts and memories, it is also the seat of our desires, fears, and instincts. Many of these unconscious elements are deeply tied to our sense of identity and self-worth. The parts of ourselves that we project onto others are often those aspects that threaten our carefully constructed sense of who we are. For instance, someone who prides themselves on being rational and controlled may project their own feelings of anger or impulsiveness onto others, perceiving them as irrational or out of control. This projection allows the person to maintain their self-impulses as composed and logical, while disowning the emotional impulses that they deem unacceptable. Projection also plays a significant role in the formation of prejudices and stereotypes. When we project our own biases, fears, and assumptions onto others, we create distorted images of entire groups of people. These projections can lead to the dehumanization of others, as we no longer see them as individuals, but as embodiments of our own unconscious projections. For example, a person who is afraid of vulnerability may project this fear onto others, viewing them as weak or overly emotional. Similarly, someone who feels powerless in their own life may project feelings of dominance and control onto others, perceiving them as threatening or oppressive. In both cases, projection distorts our understanding of others and perpetuates harmful stereotypes that prevent us from seeing people for who they truly are. One of the most significant challenges of projection is that it prevents us from taking responsibility for our own feelings and actions. When we project our unconscious content onto others, we absolve ourselves of the responsibility to examine our own internal world. Rather than acknowledging that our feelings of anger, fear, or jealousy are coming from within us, we place the blame on others, assuming that they are the ones responsible for our emotion. This not only perpetuates conflict, but also keeps us trapped in a cycle of defensiveness and denial, where we are unable to confront the deeper aspects of our psyche that are driving our behavior. The first step in addressing projection is to become aware of it. Since projection operates unconsciously, it can be difficult to recognize when we are engaging in this defense mechanism. However, by paying attention to our emotional reactions and examining the patterns in our relationships, we can begin to identify when projection is at play. For example, if we consistently find ourselves reacting with strong emotions to certain people or situations, it may be a sign that we are projecting our own unresolved issues onto them. Similarly, if we find ourselves making harsh judgments or assumptions about others without fully understanding their perspective, we may be projecting our own fears or insecurities onto them. Once we become aware of projection, the next step is to take responsibility for our own feelings and reactions. Rather than blaming others for our emotions, we must learn to look inward and ask ourselves why we are reacting in the way that we are. What unconscious fears or desires or being triggered by this situation? What parts of ourselves are we unwilling to confront or accept? By asking these questions, we can begin to disentangle our projections from the reality of the other person's experience and gain a deeper understanding of our own psyche. In doing so, we not only free ourselves from the distortions created by projection, but also open the door to more authentic and compassionate relationships. When we stop projecting our internal conflicts onto others, we are able to engage with them as they truly are, rather than as the distorted images created by our unconscious mind. This creates the space for real connection, where we can see and appreciate others for their unique realities without the interference of our own projection. Projection is an inevitable part of the human experience. It is a defense mechanism that helps us cope with the complexity and sometimes overwhelming nature of our own psyche. However, when left unchecked, projection can distort our perception of the world and create barriers between us and others. By becoming aware of our projections and taking responsibility for our inner world, we can begin to dissolve these barriers and cultivate deeper understanding and connection with those around us. In doing so, we reclaim our power to shape our reality, not by projecting our unconscious content onto others, but by integrating the hidden aspects of ourselves and seeing the world with greater clarity and authenticity. You said, expand the key point note 3 with 1200 words, but don't subhead it. ChatGPT said, the concept of integrating the shadow is one of the most transformative and illuminating aspects of personal growth. The shadow, as it is often called, refers to the parts of ourselves that we consciously reject, deny, or suppress because they do not align with the image we wish to project to the world or the ideals we hold. It consists of the traits, emotions, and desires that we deem undesirable, unworthy, or unacceptable, either because they conflict with societal norms or because they challenge the narrative we have constructed about who we are. The shadow is not inherently negative. Rather, it represents the aspects of the self that we have failed to recognize, integrate, or embrace. It holds great potential for growth, transformation, and healing, but it also requires a willingness to confront what lies hidden within us. When we talk about the integration of the shadow, we are referring to the process of acknowledging and accepting these repressed aspects of ourselves, not as something to be feared or discarded, but as a part of our whole being. In order to achieve personal wholeness, we must move beyond the superficial understanding of who we think we are and explore the depths of our unconscious mind. Only by confronting the darker or less comfortable aspects of our psyche can we fully embrace our true selves. In this way, the integration of the shadow becomes a path to self-awareness, self-acceptance, and ultimately to living a more authentic life. The shadow is often formed during childhood, when we are taught by our families, communities, and cultures which parts of ourselves are acceptable and which are not. From an early age, we learn to suppress traits or behaviors that are deemed undesirable by the external world. For example, a child who expresses anger might be told that such emotions are bad or unacceptable, leading them to suppress their anger and push it into the unconscious. Similarly, a child who is highly sensitive or emotionally expressive may be told that such traits are weak, leading them to hide their vulnerability. Over time, these rejected aspects of ourselves accumulate and become part of the shadow. They do not disappear, but rather they remain buried in the unconscious, influencing our behavior in ways we are often unaware of. What is crucial to understand about the shadow is that it is not an external force acting upon us. Rather, it is a part of us that we have actively chosen to disown. The shadow is not something that exists apart from us, but something that we have projected outward, usually because we lack the awareness or the courage to confront us directly. It represents the aspects of our personality or psyche that we have rejected or avoided, often because they conflict with our conscious Jung. For instance, someone who prides themselves on being calm and rational may repress their emotions and impulses, only to find that when their emotions do surface, they come out in overwhelming and sometimes destructive ways. Similarly, someone who identifies as a good person may repress feelings of jealousy, envy, or anger, only to have those emotions surface in subtle, passive-aggressive ways. The more we deny these aspects of ourselves, the more they remain in the shadows, distorting our perception of ourselves and others. The key to integration is recognizing that the shadow is not something inherently bad or negative. In fact, it holds valuable gifts and untapped potential that can lead to personal growth and transformation. For example, the anger that is repressed and pushed into the shadow may, when integrated, become a powerful source of energy and motivation. It may help us set healthy boundaries or stand up for ourselves in situations where we have previously been passive. Similarly, the vulnerability that we hide from others may, when acknowledged, allow us to develop deeper connections with people, creating more genuine relationships. By embracing the shadow, we begin to access these hidden strengths, and our lives become richer and more balanced. Integrating the shadow requires a deep level of honesty and self-awareness. It is easy to think that we know ourselves, that we are fully in touch with who we are, but often our understanding of ourselves is limited by the boundaries we have set. In order to access the shadow, we must be willing to look at ourselves with brutal honesty and question the assumptions we have made about our personalities, beliefs, and behaviors. This means examining the parts of ourselves that we find uncomfortable or inconvenient and being willing to sit with the discomfort rather than avoiding it. It is often much easier to deny or project these aspects onto others than to confront them within ourselves. But only by doing so can we begin to integrate them into our conscious awareness. One way to begin the process of integrating the shadow is through introspection. This involves looking inward and observing the patterns in our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. What aspects of ourselves do we feel ashamed of or try to hide? What traits or desires do we actively reject or disown? Do we find ourselves reacting strongly to certain situations or people? And if so, why? These reactions often point to hidden aspects of ourselves that we have yet to integrate. For example, if we are frequently triggered by a particular type of behavior in others, it may be a sign that we are rejecting that same behavior within ourselves. By recognizing these patterns, we can begin to bring the unconscious into consciousness, thereby giving us the opportunity to heal and transform. Another powerful way to integrate the shadow is through creative expression. Art, writing, music, and other forms of creative expression allow us to tap into the unconscious mind and express parts of ourselves that we might otherwise repress. Through creative endeavors, we can externalize the contents of the shadow, giving form to the emotions, desires, and memories that we have buried within. This process of expression can help us confront and process these unconscious elements in a way that feels safe and manageable. Creative activities also allow us to explore our emotions and experiences in an open-ended way, giving us the freedom to experiment with different aspects of our personality and identity. This process can be incredibly healing as it provides a safe space to explore and accept the parts of ourselves that we might otherwise fear. The integration of the shadow is not an overnight process, nor is it something that can be easily mastered. It requires a lifelong commitment to self-awareness, growth, and transformation. The more we learn to accept and embrace our shadow, the more we free ourselves from the constraints of the past and the fears that have held us back. Through this process of integration, we move closer to becoming our true selves, whole, authentic, and fully alive. Moreover, as we integrate our shadow, we also gain a deeper understanding of others. When we become more attuned to the hidden aspects of our own psyche, we begin to recognize those same aspects in others. This awareness fosters empathy, as we come to realize that the traits we once rejected in ourselves are often the same traits we see in others. The judgments and projections we make about others begin to dissolve as we recognize that we are all dealing with our own shadow. This shift in perspective leads to more compassion, tolerance, and understanding, both for ourselves and for others. Ultimately, integrating the shadow is about becoming whole, accepting all aspects of ourselves, not just the parts that are easy or comfortable to embrace. It is about facing the parts of us that we have hidden away, acknowledging their existence and making them a conscious part of our lives. This process of integration is not always easy, but it is deeply rewarding. It opens us up to new possibilities, new insights, and a deeper sense of connection with both ourselves and the world around us. The shadow, once embraced, becomes a source of strength, creativity, and wisdom, and we can begin to live more fully, authentically, and with greater purpose. He said, write a conclusion of entire speech. ChatGPT said, in conclusion, the journey to understanding that your opinion is not my reality begins with a deep exploration of the uniqueness of individual consciousness, the projection of our unconscious content, and the integration of our shadow. Each of these elements reminds us that the reality we experience is inherently personal and shaped by the layers of our psyche, influenced by our perceptions, desires, and unconscious beliefs. No two individuals experience the world in the same way, as their inner worlds are formed by their unique histories, emotions, and identities. Our projections often cloud our interactions, preventing us from fully engaging with others as they truly are. It is only by confronting the hidden parts of ourselves, the shadow, that we can begin to see beyond these projections and understand both ourselves and others more deeply. By embracing the complexity and depth of our own consciousness, we can begin to cultivate empathy and compassion, recognizing that the reality we each inhabit is not an objective truth, but a subjective experience shaped by our inner worlds. This understanding enables us to move beyond conflict and misunderstanding, creating the possibility for more authentic relationships and a more harmonious coexistence. Embracing the journey of self-awareness and transformation, we not only free ourselves from the confines of our projections and suppressed aspects, but also open ourselves to greater growth, connection, and wisdom. Ultimately, the recognition that your opinion is not my reality invites us to approach each other with curiosity, respect, and an openness to the richness of human experience. It calls us to acknowledge that the truths we hold are just that, our own truths, and that each person, through their unique lens, brings a valuable perspective to the table. By understanding this, we foster a world in which understanding, acceptance, and self-awareness become the foundation for deeper connections and shared growth.